A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, I got my start in the film business. So what I'd like to do is take you back in time, back to Universal Studios in the spring of 1979. I'm sitting in an office in the motel building, far removed from the infamous Black Tower from which Lew Wasserman rules the studio like a remote, often vengeful god. And I'm chatting with the story editor. Who am I to enjoy what seems to me such a great privilege? Nobody, yet. I'm just a college professor with a lifelong love of the movies. Someone who's never had a course in film, never, but whose love of the medium led him to create, to plant the seeds of a film program at a small Midwestern university called DePauw. I snuck it in to the winter term, and it was not an easy thing to do because the English faculty at that point in time considered film the literary equivalent of comic books. Of course, today they'd be right. Most films are made from graphic novels. We did an intro course that stressed both film history and film interpretation. That led to a seminar in Hitchcock and Wells. I managed to set up internships for my students at the Directors Guild of America. And then I won a grant from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to bring a director to campus, a man by the name of Lamont Johnson, a man who should be celebrated for some of the greatest television movies of all time, among them The Execution of Private Slovak with Marty Sheen. And if you have not seen it, you should. At any rate, we had quite a time together, Lamont and I, and at the end of that time, as I managed somehow to survive crisis after crisis, Lamont said, "Dan, come to Hollywood. Come to Hollywood." Well, the question, of course, was how? Well, I managed, and this again was through another friend, Will Hayes Jr. I don't know if you know about all the connections to the film world you have here in Indiana, but the morality czar of Hollywood, the man who created the Hayes Code, is a graduate of Wabash College, a native of Crawfordsville, as was his son, who went on to become the director of the Lilly Endowment's urban program. Much of what has happened in downtown Indianapolis is a result of Will Hayes Jr.'s work. Well, Will Hayes Jr. was a friend of mine, and when I told him what I wanted to do, there was this Lilly scholarship or fellowship that encouraged faculty, tenured faculty, to move into new professions. Most universities and colleges were in danger of becoming tenured in. And so Lilly decided, okay, let's see if we can't find some way to lure people out of education. And that was the grant that I applied for. And through Will, I made contact with a man named George Seaton. George was the writer-director of Miracle on 34th Street, The Country Girl, Airport, and he truly was Kris Kringle, one of the great human beings of all time. He agreed to sponsor me as an intern at Universal. And that is how I happened to find myself sitting in that story editor's office in the motel building. As far as I was concerned, I'd finally gotten to heaven, the place I dreamed of being all my life. Now, it probably didn't look that way to most people. It was called the motel building, and there was a reason for that. It was a decaying 40s or 50s motel, battered furniture, institution green walls, the sliding glass doors glazed with a patina of year-old dirt, looking onto this stark concrete patio. But I felt like Wendy glimpsing Neverland for the first time. It's probably more like Alice about to fall through that rabbit hole into Wonderland. But I felt, at last, I'm inside. Well, I'm sitting there chatting with John Humphreys, the story editor, hoping against hope that John will interrupt the conversation and say, Dan, you're a bright, talented fellow. How would you like to join us here in the story department at Universal? Unfortunately, my fantasy was interrupted by the ring of a phone. It was noon. John and I were the only two people in the building. He answered the phone himself. And this low-key, quiet, controlled guy who always spoke in a monotone said, Yes, Mr. Hitchcock. I'm familiar with your work. I think, oh my God, Alfred Hitchcock, the Shakespeare of the cinema, my hero, the man I've taught seminars, is on the phone. Well, I'm having a meltdown, an absolute spastic fit, as John just quietly talking in this matter-of-fact, mundane matter to the world's greatest living filmmaker. It turns out that Hitchcock's latest film, Short Night, which he had planned to shoot in Finland in midwinter, had fallen through. And he had called John to ask if he could find him a new project. Well, John not only knew Hitchcock's work well, he knew the literary scene, the contemporary literary scene, very well. And he pulled out a manuscript he just received from a cult writer, not terribly well known at the time, by the name of Dean Koontz. It was called Whispers. And I got the manuscript, which stood about this high, the same afternoon Alfred Hitchcock did. And I stayed up all night reading it. I was so excited. About 3 in the morning, I got down on the floor, the pain in my knees. I laid it on the bed and hoped the pain in my knees would keep me awake so I could get to the end. It was dynamite. Well, Hitchcock loved it as much as I did. Well, he wasn't even aware of my existence, but he liked it too. And my friend John negotiated a deal for him with CAA, one of the biggest agencies in town. Unfortunately, there were other powers at work behind the scene. John got a phone call from a man who later became a good friend of mine, Ned Tannen, the man who nursed American Graffiti and, well, on and on, all kinds of wonderful films through Universal. And Ned says, "What do you think you're doing? You say yes to that old man. You do whatever that old man asks, except you never ever do business with that old man." What? Well, John, the newly appointed story editor, was shaking in his boots. If Ned Tannen screams at you, you know you've been screamed at. It turns out that Lew Wasserman, Alfred Hitchcock's closest friend, the man who had lured him from Paramount to Universal, had decided that Hitchcock, the third largest stockholder in MCA, the parent company of Universal, was too old and too feeble ever to make another movie. And they weren't going to spend another dime on him. And so Whispers went away. And so the next year did Alfred Hitchcock. But I did not.
Some of you must be wondering what happened to me after the Hitchcock incident. Others may be asking themselves whether Whispers ever made it to the screen. For the answer to these and other questions, like what are the elements of an effective pitch, and what does it take to survive and thrive in Hollywood, you'll want to hear all of Chasing the Rainbow. How? Book me for an appearance at your college, university, film festival, or bookstore.